I will take you with me. You might learn something.
About soccer?
Nah, mate. Not about soccer. And for fuck's sake, stop saying soccer!
The on-field sit-in, fans furious at financial mismanagement of a 150-year-old club. The takeover of a Premier League behemoth by a wealth fund linked to a country facing serious human rights questions. Talk of a European breakaway and the failure of the richest league in the world to play nicely and share its lucre down the so-called football pyramid. Decades of reasons why fans might be relieved the government's finally decided to regulate English football.
Cost is not enough. I understand it's more, there needs to be systemic changes to the way that clubs are run across the whole country. Because it's not just Man United, it's not just the Glazers.
So, will the bill stop breakaway leagues like the European Super League? Yes, absolutely, because that is one of the reasons why we ended up doing the independent regulator. The noise from fans over the plans for a closed shop Super League really was deafening. And so we have made sure that unless there is support, the regulator can stop clubs going away on breakaway Super Leagues like the one that was proposed.
You just heard a little history lesson of what happened in English football 3-4 years ago. And then the Minister for Sports and Culture last month outlining a governmental response to these developments. And I promise you, what sounds like a very technical and political debate that's very arcane and unique to the United Kingdom, it isn't. It gets to a more global fight for the soul of the game. And whenever the wealthiest and most spectacularly and most excessively capitalistic league in the world has to work around a government regulator, and the league pyramid around it supports that regulator, and so do fans, then I think fans of the game globally will have to listen up a little bit. And that's what we're doing today, together with Michael Brunskill from the Football Supporters Association, the one official lobbying union, if you will, for soccer fans in England and the United Kingdom. And they have been talking to, and are still talking to, the government around this football regulator law all along since, at latest, the Super League proposal came and went. And now that the independent football regulator has been proposed by the government, it's supposed to address matters of the financial soundness of clubs. That includes sensible financial decisions by ownership. It's supposed to address financial resilience across the league pyramid, including issues such as the distribution and redistribution of money beyond the Premier League. And it's supposed to take care of questions of heritage. So fans' vetoes on matters of crest colors, jersey colors, stadium move, location move. And if done well, I am cautiously optimistic that this British proposal could have global ramifications in how fans view the game and in how clubs ought to behave. What didn't go so well was the lead up to this week's episode. We were initially going to go to Bergamo and talk through the origin story of one of Europe's most influential ultra cultures, I think at the very beginning of that movement, latest since the 1980s. And, well, the stars didn't align, or people have different ideas of when to find scheduling. And so I had to put the brakes on and swerve sharply early this week, and now bring you this episode, which I think is on a very, very relevant and timely topic as well. I hope our journey to Bergamo, Italy is only postponed and not canceled. They're traveling to Marseille this week, and if you want to hear about that host club, go back a few episodes in this season as well. But now we go to England, more specifically to the far north of England, and to Michael Brunskill. Welcome, Michael. Visiting professor for today. Thank you for walking us through what sounds like a very dry and technical and political topic at first, but is important to lovers of the game in England, but I think also globally. Before we get into what is going on with this regulator business, why England, of all places, the most overcapitalized football landscape, why is England considering a regulator? Before we get there, who are you? What's your football journey, and what do you do with the FSA, the Football Supporters Association?
Yes, the FSA is the national democratic body for football supporters in this country, in England and Wales. We don't cover Scotland, but we sort of operate like a trade union for football supporters in this country, representing fans' interests. We are free to join. We are recognised by the Premier League, the AFL, the FA, the government, and so on, as the voice that they come to if they want to hear what football supporters think. All our policies on ticket prices, standing, supporter ownership, policing and stewarding, governance, they are all set at our AGM in a democratic fashion. So quite often, as is the way on Twitter, we'll have people saying, "Oh, why is the FSA saying this?" And I'll say, well, that's a valid viewpoint. Join the FSA, come to our AGM, propose a motion, and we can think what you think if enough people agree with you. So that's how we're structured. We have individual members, individual supporters, and also affiliated members and associate members. They are affiliates or supporters groups, effectively democratic supporters groups at specific clubs who join us. And they make up a big chunk of our membership. Very important voice. The most important voice and the loudest voice within the organisation will come from our affiliated members. So lots of supporters groups there that people might have heard of. The most famous ones being groups like Spirit of Shankly, Manchester United Supporters Trust, Arsenal Supporters Trust, Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust. All these big Premier League clubs all have these groups and they affiliate to the FSA. And we try and take their voices to the authorities, but we also run right down to grassroots level. Again, the same structure, and all members are equal. So a democratic member at, say, my hometown club, Gateshead, has the same number of votes as Manchester United Supporters Trust, and effectively then the same voice at the AGM. So that's sort of how we work. We also do a bit of international stuff, supporting travelling fans for the England men's and women's team as well, which the latter has been a good development in recent years and a big development in terms of the popularity of the Lionesses in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Gateshead, you said, is your team.
Gateshead is my hometown club. I go to some games, but I support Sunderland in terms of my club who I've always went to since I was a boy. But I've been to a lot of Gateshead games over the years as well. But Gateshead are quite a sort of smaller team in the National League. They have been in the news lately though, because they have been banned from competing in the National League playoffs to get into the EFL because they do not have a 10-year lease on their football ground. I won't bore you with more on that, but it was quite a controversial subject in Gateshead.
Yes, yeah. The city was involved there.
The council owns the ground, and they won't give the club a sort of 10-year lease without sort of clauses in there that the EFL didn't like too much. So from a sporting point of view, it's a real shame for obviously the players and the supporters. From the EFL point of view, they have their rules and you can see why they have to enforce them. And I think they worked a lot with the club and the council to try and fix the problem. But there we are. The shame for Gateshead. This is going to turn into the history of Gateshead. Back in the 50s, Gateshead had a team which wasn't exactly the same team, but people treated it as the same team. And Gateshead were in the Football League and they were voted out of the Football League, not relegated, but voted out by teams who basically didn't want to have to travel all the way up to Gateshead, which is quite far up in the north of England. So yes. Gateshead were voted out, despite not coming bottom of the league, voted out and then replaced by someone else. So this is a bitter topic in Gateshead, but let's move on.
Good. Geographic location at football ground. Interesting stuff. Okay, regulator, you've already outlined this structure of equity within the FSA. Same votes for Gateshead as well as for Manchester United, for example. For all of these clubs in the Premier League and in the English Football League, the regulator would come in. And when I hear regulator, I imagine white dude in a suit with a binder in his arms who can look up stuff in that binder and tell you yes or no. What is that how it's going to look like? Just a quick overview. What will the regulator do, and who is or might be the regulator in the first place?
Those details are just getting sorted now. I mean, obviously, it's such a big job. It's not going to be one individual is a regulator. You know, there'll be a team of people who work for the regulator. Just for clarity, I'm not involved in setting that up in any way. That's by the government and Department for Culture, Media and Sport.
That's unfortunate. So my scenario with the dude in a suit.
Well, it could. I'm not saying it won't be a dude in a suit. There's probably mathematically quite a good chance that the head of the regulator will end up being
it will be a white dude in a suit, yes.
Oh, well, I think, there's a possibility that given how the makeup of these things sometimes work, but obviously the regulator itself and the person who has that top job, that's going out as a job, so anyone can and will apply for that. Who knows who will get that job? But there will be a regulatory team working around that. And they will be based, I understand it's just been announced in Manchester, so they're going to be based in Manchester, which is actually, I think, quite a good thing from an English perspective, because London dominates England so heavily that I think it's always, speaking as a northerner, I'm not particularly close to Manchester geographically, but just good to see things spread out around the country a little bit. So they'll be based in Manchester. And the reason that we're going to have this regulator is because for decades, really, there have been competing houses of power within English football almost, with the Premier League being now by far the dominant voice. They have some regulatory functions that I don't think they particularly carry out well in a lot of cases. Exhibit A at the minute, Manchester City are obviously being investigated for alleged financial offences from 2009. So that was 15 years ago, and they still haven't fixed that. Back in 2009, we had, well, it was a very different landscape, wasn't it? A long time ago. Premier League haven't fixed that. You had, as well as the Premier League regulatory functions, you've also got the FA, who have their own, and also the EFL, who have oversight on their clubs. But what we've always found is that if it's a particularly gnarly issue, there can be a tendency for the authorities to sort of, pass the buck a little bit about whose responsibility it is. Or quite often you'll find that the EFL or Premier League, even if their staff, the individual staff can actually be very good at both organisations, they may well want to take action, but ultimately both the Premier League and the EFL are membership bodies. So it's quite difficult to investigate your own membership and take action against them. So obviously having an independent regulator who would sit above that and would have proactive powers to intervene, because it might not have made the news so much outside of England. Obviously, I totally understand why, but down in Leagues 1 and League 2, so the third, fourth tier in this country in the EFL, there's been a lot of clubs really struggling or going out of business, disappearing altogether. And the EFL, for all they were trying to do the right thing, didn't always have the tools to do it, I think. And we would like to see a body that was able to be much more proactive when they know things are going wrong and intervene. Because quite often when the EFL felt they were legally allowed to intervene, the ship had sailed, it was too late. The bad owners had made their bad decisions and it was almost irreparable.
Right. I mean, this is the critique, the EFL and Premier League unable to regulate themselves, and particularly in the case of the EFL, we've had cases of historic clubs led on a path that is financially not sustainable at all and going into administration or folding it all.
Different problems at the bottom to the top as well.
Yes,
at the bottom, obviously the challenges around the income that they have in expenditure. But at the top end, there's this temptation in the Championship to roll the dice. You're so close to the Premier League. Let's throw some money in it. Let's gamble our budget for the next few years and blow it all on this season. All chips on black. And if that goes wrong, well, obviously the club, there's real problems down the line and bills to pay, and can those bills be settled? So I think it's really important from that point of view. And part of what we want to see the regulator or this process fix, this governance bill fix, is to give the regulator some form of input into try and help fix the financial disparity between the Premier League and the Championship, because that's at the root cause of a lot of the problems.
What's stopping an unfit owner from buying my club and running it into the ground? Well, The independent regulator will have the powers they need to do an assessment and a check on all new potential owners of football clubs. This will make sure we understand where their wealth has come from, ensure that they provide sound financial plans for the club, and they work closely with the regulator so that we know that they are fit and proper people to run a football club, and then we don't see some of the instances that we have in other clubs in this country.
In the popular imagery, the Super League protests play a big role here. So it's 2021, and I remember I was same place where I'm at now, same university, same friends who are interested in European football. And I was celebrating these protests while some of my American friends were rather shocked by them, by their nature, by how visceral this was. Remember Manchester United fans storming the stadium, yada, yada, yada. And that is often seen as kind of, all right, this is when the tables turned. And this is when the public's outcry was so loud that the government had to do something. The FSA is on the topic and is highlighting what is going on within the league pyramid for much longer than that already. Is there a point where you would take us to maybe say, here is the root cause of this? Here's when the story begins. Here is when we first see the symptoms that we need to get to the root of. Is it a creation of the Premier League? Is it TV? Or is the Super League really, as colloquially known, this big table turner in the consciousness of the public?
Well, I think it was building slowly before then. Like you say, I mean, we could probably rewind back decades, but in my mind, sort of this stage of it was around about, obviously, 2016. You have Leicester City winning the Premier League, and that granted them basically automatic access to the top table in the Champions League. And I think the general consensus was that Agnelli at Juventus was a bit put out by this. Here at Juve and all those other top elite clubs, we've been building this Champions League brand for decades. Why can these little clubs come along and spoil the party? You know, why should we potentially be locked out of what we've built? So from 2016, for a few years, there was constant pressure from the clubs, and we campaigned with our friends who we affiliate to at Football Supporters Europe to try and combat it. Constant push from the top clubs, though, to bloat the European competitions, basically to make them bigger, to have more dates in the calendar, more TV fixtures, which equates to more media revenue, obviously. Trying to stitch up the competition in different ways to make either access impossible, which is ultimately what they sort of did through the European Super League, or make it really difficult through like systems whereby if a quote new team won their league, they would go into like a second tier European competition and have to work through and be promoted through that until they got to the top table, rather than the traditional format, which has been around for, drifting towards a century. It's been around for now, where you win your league and you go into the European Cup as was. Well, then they obviously change it to the Champions League format, where the top 3 or 4 teams from a lot of the biggest leagues go in there. But ultimately, you're straight in there. If you compete out, if you qualify from your league, you gain access to that top tier competition, which is how it should be. Mm-hmm. And UEFA were just sort of giving into the clubs constantly, incrementally, but never as much as the clubs wanted. So no party either side was quite satisfied, but neither scenario was what fans wanted, So we were aware of this happening for years, and we were campaigning with Football Supporters Europe. But it's a really difficult thing to combat when you get down to it on a real granular level, because we can all make noise in the media and say, oh, it's terrible, this competition blood. Well, how do you stop it? Because UEFA are individually made up of all their own FAs as member organisations. Mm-hmm. So if the top clubs say, well, if you vote in favour of this, maybe you'll get another £2 million to a relatively small FA, and you can build a new FA headquarters with this, or you can invest it in your grassroots funding. So you can basically buy the votes in that sense. And I'm not talking about in a corrupt way. I'm just talking about how UEFA decide to streamline their funds, to stream their funds. And that's
structurally a similar problem to what you pointed out before with the leaks. There's vested interest here to not regulate yourself too harshly, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the vested interest there was allowed the wealth of the top clubs to sort of to sort of strong arm UEFA into this position where, you know, they can effectively encourage national FAs to vote in favour of something that doesn't affect their clubs. Because I can understand it from the FA, if you're from a relatively small country who doesn't have a team that competes right at the top of European football, so it's not really going to affect you too much if the Super League is sort of stitched up if the Champions League is sort of restructured in a certain way. You think, well, we vote in favour of this, we can build a great new national FA and invest 5 times what we used to in grassroots football. Brilliant. Why wouldn't you vote for that? Mm-hmm. So there was a bit of an issue there as well. But anyway, that was 2016 onwards. We then went through to, and this is British parochial thing, but in 2019 there was a government.
Bury FC was also in 2019.
Well, yeah, 2019. So these issues were coming to the crunch there. That's a good point. So that the government, or the parties running to be the next government in 2019 in Britain were aware of this as an issue, and the Conservative Party inserted into their manifesto a line which was, we will have a fan-led review of football governance if we win the election, which was a key line for us. So then, and this was partly a political thing on their part, and fair enough, because there was a lot of what in this country is called red wall seats, they started to call them. I don't know if that makes any sense to the listeners from abroad, but it's
probably not to American listeners, but you can briefly explain it.
Yeah, red wall, it meant basically seats that would traditionally would be held by the Labour Party.
By the left party.
Yes, the left party. They would be the equivalent of the Democrats in Britain.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
And but traditionally the equivalent of the Republicans, the Conservative Party, they were all of a sudden in for a shout and winning these sort of post-industrial heartland areas.
Especially up where you are in the north, right? And so you're saying the strategy is in part, let's get to the interest of the football fans. So we have a better chance at winning these areas from Labour.
Yeah, exactly. And because a lot of the clubs, just because of culture and economics, and so a lot of the clubs are clustered around these post-industrial heartlands, especially in the northwest, like the Bury, Macclesfield, all these clubs in trouble. All of a sudden, it was an interesting political talking point, and it went into the Conservative manifesto. Conservatives won that election. So moving forward, when the Super League thing did kick off, and the politicians realised the wave of anger in April 2021?
2021, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when they realised there was this wave of anger, and they're like, what levers can we pull to show we can have an effect on this? That was the lever they pulled. They went to the fan-led review of football governance. It was in the manifesto, and said, we're going to enact this, and one of the things that can look at is the European Super League. Now, obviously, in the previous 2 years, we've been banging on the door all the time saying, when are you going to enact this fan-led review of football governance? And it wasn't happening so quickly then, but the European Super League, own goal by the clubs, absolutely supercharged that. So
that added urgency, right?
Yeah, to those 6 club owners who decided to break away and form a European Super League. Thank you very much. You look at what you did.
No, that added a lot of urgency. That in some ways, obviously from an FSA standpoint, you would have said, if you would have looked closely, you would have felt that urgency before. Just to close the loop briefly, I mentioned Bury FC, expelled from the EFL, English Football League, in 2019. And that's just one case of bad leadership, lack of financial stability, just a mess there. One of these Manchester area industrial town, very historical clubs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I went personally, one of my Sunderland support and one of my highlights of supporting Sunderland was actually at Bury. We won the championship there 25 years ago now, scarily enough. Stood on a grass bank terrace with my dad at Bury. So that was quite a formative football experience looking back. But yeah, proper legit, well-known club with a big history, a long history. Not necessarily a huge club that people abroad might have known about because they didn't win domestic trophies at the top level. But to an English football fan, that part of the landscape just as much as any other big club you might have heard of. So so that was a big moment. Bury struggling, and there's been 64 teams, I think, went in their administration from the EFL Premier League since the Premier League's formation. 64 teams. And obviously, as well as the sporting impact, it's easy to forget as well when these clubs go under, they leave a trail of debt to local plumbers, electricians, caterers, the ambulance service. All these local important businesses and services are left out of pocket because a football club has been, if a football club has been mismanaged, and it's something that is solvable. So why don't we try and solve it?
They leave that, and they leave a gaping hole in the culture and in a sense of heritage of a city very frequently as well.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a map that I've seen doing the rounds of a pinning where there's a football club in England, and it's like ludicrously dense in terms of how many clubs there is who compete at a professional level and a semi-professional level. I suspect, I've said this before, no one's ever disproved it. England may not be the most successful nation, certainly not on an international level. We've obviously had our share of club success, but I genuinely don't know if there's another nation where down to the fifth tier in this country, say, so the National League, that's the fifth league, you have clubs who played there who have pulled in 10,000 people. For the National League playoff final in the fifth tier, it's quite common to get sort of 40,000 people go along to watch that match in the fifth tier. And I'm genuinely not sure that happens anywhere else on the planet. I would love to be shown an example because I think it's an interesting subject.
Yeah. I think not even in Germany.
Yeah.
On that level. Yeah.
And so what it shows is that each one of those, so you're talking about there, just running through those teams, that sort of, I don't know how many teams is that, 92, 116 teams, say, plus the National League North and South below, getting up to more than 160 teams. All of those towns and cities really invest in their team. The clubs take their name from it, the town and city from which they were born, and I think all of that town and city are debt, and part of that debt is to make sure they are financially sustainable going forward and don't leave that gaping hole in the culture that you talk about if things go wrong.
What if my club tries to change its home kit and badge? Well, the regulator will be able to ensure that this does not happen unless the support is given by the fans. They must follow the FA rules that give those protections on things like the badge that is so important to football clubs, or even the colour of their kit.
That culture depends, on a healthy league pyramid, which has been increasingly skewed since the founding of the Premier League, and it depends on some financial stability in that pyramid as well. And a lot of that is what the regulator is supposed to do. So we've already, I think you've quite convincingly said the system isn't able to regulate itself. You need an outside agency to step in. This will now be this regulating agency. How did the government, with the fan-led review, arrive at the conclusion that this is the format we're going to go for? So could you walk us through very briefly, what did the fan-led review yield? And then what's the path from there to the regulator proposal that is now on the table as of last month?
Yeah, of course, it's very thorough process. I mean, we've learned about it as a went. Very thorough process involving lots of reports and bills and reviews, but I'll walk through them all. So the first stage was when the Department for Culture, Media and Sport said, right, we're going to do this fan-led review. What sort of structure should it be? And we put our hands up and said, well, actually, we think that rather than doing a roadshow around the country and doing it geographically, because there's a temptation to do that. You know, you go up the Northwest, see what everyone thinks up there. You go to the Northeast, see what everyone thinks there. You go to the Midlands and you have these like media roadshows. But we said, actually, do it by leagues, because leagues are where you have shared experiences and interests and stuff. Whereas if you go to the Northeast, like I say, I could be a Gateshead fan and I'm less than 2 miles away from Newcastle United Stadium, but the sort of experiences and
your interests are quite different.
Yeah.
Those are the fans by a club owned by the Sun investment.
So we do it by leagues, and they listened to that, and they did set it up by leagues, and also gave the EFLs and the leagues and themselves an opportunity to feed into it. So there was a panel, an expert panel, which was led by an MP called Tracy Crouch, who used to be the sports minister, and had various stakeholders on, from clubs, from the FSA, from politics. And that panel interviewed about 120 plus supporters groups from across all the different leagues. So that's the fan-led review part. But it also, to be fair, interviewed Premier League, FA, AFL, all had an opportunity to input. And that panel pulled together a report, which was submitted to government. And the government reviewed that. And from there, pulled together its own white paper, which is sort of something that comes before the government proposes a sort of legislative bill. So it's a chance for everyone to do a bit of a review and input into that, and lobby departments and MPs and so on. So there was then a white paper, which, to be fair, both the Crouch report, as it's now known, which was the fan-led review part, which we submitted our very detailed evidence to, hundreds of pages of evidence, that, and following on from that, the white paper into the legislation, a lot of the ideas that we proposed have flowed through into that. And now that so it went fan-led review, white paper, then the bill is proposed to Parliament. It is now in Parliament and being debated in Parliament because it has government support, the majority support, and opposition support. It is, you never want to count things too early, touch wood. It is certainly very, very, very likely to pass. So now it's about what amendments can we make? How can we strengthen it? How can we get MPs to tweak it? What will the government accept in terms of those tweaks? And what will it not? So it's at that stage at the minute. So I had a review this morning with a call this morning with our team that leads that. They are extremely nerdy and very, 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 very good at going through a very, very long document and picking out individual, right down to the level of that clause there says must, but it should say may. We need to change that. It's really at that type of level that they're working through to make sure that the big picture ideas that we have about protecting clubs, about keeping out bad owners, about giving fans an opportunity to input into important heritage topics like colour of kit, the location of stadiums, the club badges and stuff, to make sure all these protections are in place. The words have to be right. So it's at that form now going through Parliament, and that's
is there push from the other side as well?
Oh,
so now that the word is out, I'm assuming the Premier League, which initially was just fine with the fan-led review, it may be swallowing some of its own words. Is there? Do you encounter lobbying in the other direction as well?
Yeah, certainly. The Premier League told a parliamentary committee in January that it wouldn't lobby against the bill. And then all of a sudden there's lots of news articles from the Premier League saying, don't put this bill forward, which seems to me that within months of saying they wouldn't lobby, they've certainly started lobbying. So
there's definitely something concerted going on.
Yeah, absolutely. The Premier League, I mean, we meet with, to be honest, it's not like, it's not like we don't meet with the Premier League. We meet with them and talk about them because a lot of the areas of it around supporter engagement, we need their support with anyway. We need to work with them on it anyway. So there's some areas of overlap there, but it's obviously on the financial side of things where they have a vastly different view. This is such a bill that covers such a range of things that some of the things in it, the Premier League wouldn't have an issue with and will deal with them around that. Other things that they don't support so much. But again, you've also got other players in it, like the AFL, who are, I think our position is quite close to the AFL's. The major things around that are because there's something like we touched on earlier, parachute payments. Both the FSA and the AFL think the parachute payments have to be looked at as part of this. Parachute payment, for those who don't know, if you are relegated out of the Premier League for the next 3 years, you receive quite a lot more TV money than anyone else in the Championship who you will be competing with the following season.
Yes.
But you go down a league. And it's a lot of difference. I mean, you're talking about a relegated team under the Premier League's proposed new financial rules. I think a relegated team would end up with about £120 million transfer budget. versus a top-end championship team of about 20 million. So about 5 times the transfer budget for a relegated Premier League team, which over time means you sort of get a 23-team Premier League, maybe a 24 or 25-team Premier League if the same team's bouncing up and down.
Yes, and you're already getting a growing cadre of clubs where that is the case.
Exactly.
We've seen that over the last years.
It looks quite like, not certain, but quite likely that the 3 teams who went down last year could well go up this year from the championship.
Yep.
So there's that, and we agree with the AFL on that needs fixing. And there's something else that people refer to as backstop powers, which is basically the regulator we think should be able to trigger its own intervention where needed. Whereas as the bill is at present, you would have to have the Premier League or the AFL trigger the regulator's interest. But there's scenarios where Premier League and AFL could conceivably agree on something that maybe the regulator didn't think was in the best interests of the game, but then it couldn't intervene. And we think if you've got a regulator, it should be able to choose when it intervenes on something which has the macro importance of the national financial health of football. So that's another thing that's quite interesting that we're working on.
Yeah.
And strengthening other things around it, around supporter engagement as well, to make sure that it's, because that's where this bill originally started, I suppose, the lack of supporter engagement around the European Super League.
Yes.
Which is actually, last thing, and I know you've got another question, but also as well, it's easy to forget sometimes actually that the European Super League did kick this off, and the bill has now in place the powers to stop any teams in this country at least joining a breakaway European Super League. So that's done. That's ticked off, and no one's arguing over that. That's just done. That
was the headline, or often is the headline. That comes first in articles covering this development. No more Super League.
Yeah.
From your perspective too, that is sealed.
Yeah. That's not up for debate.
Which is not to say that an English club couldn't join the Super League. It's just they couldn't also play in the English league system at the same time. Correct?
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. It was quite interesting because that was my understanding. Like, Man United or whoever wanted to join the Super League, well, go for it, but you'll be kicked out of the Premier League and you'll not be able to compete in, the FA Cup or whatever. But I did speak to someone who said, no, that we think this would just stop them altogether. But I'm not sure how that works. But I suppose that's a bit like a theoretical argument because for all a top Premier League team might want to join the European Super League or whatever, they're really going to want to walk away from the Premier League's guaranteed income stream, and I'm not so sure they would do so. It's probably a bit of a interesting one for the theorists to debate. But anyway, long story short, they're not going to be able to join them now.
Yeah. Politically, is there opposition to the plan? Are the Conservatives sticking together? Has Labour provided helpful impact here as well? Is there a lot of political unity around this? You said it's pretty sure to pass.
Yeah, it's got cross-party support. All the parties support it. Quite interesting that, obviously we're very pleased to see it tabled by a Conservative government, but also very pleased to see the Labour Party approached it maturely and didn't try to turn it into a political football. They've been very good at identifying where the bill maybe could be a bit stronger, but also supporting the good elements of the bill and not doing that political thing of pretending that like it's rubbish because of X, Y, and Z, just because the opposition party tabled it. There's been none of that. It's been a very healthy cross-party bit of political work, I think, and all the parties deserve credit for that. They're probably, in terms of opposition, there'll be the odd probably backbench MP, maybe more from the Conservative side, who maybe wouldn't support it just because ideologically they don't think the government should be interfering in this type of thing. But
I was wondering, yeah,
but they're very much, that's politics. There's 650 MPs. There's always going to be some. But you're talking about handfuls, and there's not going to be any.
Okay,
that's an issue. I think
that's remarkable. It's not many issues that unite the English political landscape.
I think like this probably the biggest voice is, like, say, the Premier League lobbying. And to be fair, the Premier League do have a big voice. They deserve a big voice. They're putting billions into the British tax coffers, so they are going to have influence in government. That's the real world that we live in. But hopefully the government stay strong on the parts of the bill that really matter and listen to the supporter voice, because that's how it started in the first place, and it has to stay true to that. And I think at the minute we're certainly confident that it's looking like it's going to be a very good piece of legislation. Not perfect, certainly not 100% how we would have done it, but it's a lot better than things were, and there's going to be a lot of positive things come out of it.
What about the time frame? When do you expect this to be passed, and when do you expect to see the first bit of fallout once the white dude in the suit marches around?
Passing, I think it's scheduled to go through by the end of the year, if all things being equal. But there's a but on that, because there's the possibility that the Conservatives could announce a snap election, an unexpected election over the summer, in which case it might even then happen quicker. Because if they announce that in the next couple of weeks, I believe there's a sort of informal system, which in this country they call a wash-up, which means that because both parties agree to this, they'll just push through the legislation quickly, so it doesn't become an argument during an election. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if an election is called, which is possible but not likely, it could come through even quicker.
It's
but
for international listeners, we should say in Britain, election get called. So there isn't a kind of a standard US.
Yeah.
Every 4 years, first Tuesday, da-da-da-da-da. So this might happen rather soon.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, I didn't think of that there. That different systems work differently, obviously. But
no, your system is kind of weird. Other people would say, and vice versa.
The British parliamentary system is unusual, I think, at times.
It's beautifully archaic in many ways.
Yeah,
I like it a lot.
Yeah, that's a good word to describe. Well, it's okay. It's so archaic. We even have the King proposing the legislation. So King Charles is on record as saying he will bring forward football governance legislation, and then his government has to enact that. So
yes,
King Charles, big fan of football governance, on the record. So yeah, there could be an election. It's likely to be next year, but there's a small chance it could be over summer. And if that happens, the regulator could come even quicker. But in a way, though, if it does come even quicker, that doesn't give you the opportunity to tweak things and to try and make the amendments that you might want to make. So in a way, sometimes patience is a virtue, because as it's progressing, we might have the opportunity to improve things.
Yeah.
But maybe the other side think that as well. So
what would be your top points to improve maybe at this point? What are, from a supporter's perspective, what are the best things that could be added to the current package now?
I think the big things that are a realistic prospect of succeeding, being added, accepted by the government, are to give backstop powers to the regulator. So this is the idea that the regulator can trigger its own intervention if there's a dispute between the Premier League and AFL over finances. So that's the parachute payments one as well. So I think that's the big one. So getting the regulator to be able to trigger its own intervention if there's a dispute between the Premier League and if there's agreement between the AFL and Premier League, but the regulator thinks that's not necessarily a force for good, it should be able to intervene. The other one, slightly separate, is the parachute payments issue. So at the minute, the way the bill's worded, the regulator wouldn't necessarily have any sway or any influence over determining the financial share of wealth in English football.
Right.
And we think it should have more, it can't be it can't be a dictator. It can't dictate to the leagues who should give what to what, but I think it should be there as a, maybe have some role, and that the EFL think that too. So I think those two things, letting the regulator trigger its own powers and having some sway over parachute payments, I think is the big two things remaining that are not in the.
English clubs, Premier League especially, but I also know a few cases of clubs lower down in the league pyramid, have, through TV, through tourism, seen quite a boost in global followership over the last decade or two. What can those fans, some of whom listen to this, do from abroad? Is there any way to support your work as fan advocates? Is there a way to join supporters' trusts on a local level? What would you say to somebody who lives not in England, is interested though in the issues that you raised, and would like to show some support and not just be a consumer on TV?
That's a very good question. Obviously, in terms of the political process, specific actions, but if you're a fan abroad, you're not going to be able to obviously lobby an MP or something, because they're going to listen to the people who are voters and who live in their constituency. However, beyond that, I think generally sharing positive message on social media that you might see from your local supporters trust, so even clubs in the leagues around this process, that has an impact. And I think generally the voice, it's an interesting time for English football, because particularly for the biggest Premier League teams, they have a lot of supporters from abroad, but the interests with supporters in the stadiums they're not always in sync. Kick-off times is an obvious one, but obviously a lot of supporters in this country would like to see kick-off times at Saturday at 3 p.m. But an audience abroad, that might not be a suitable time for them, because obviously everyone's in a different time zone. So I would say, just within any demands that you have on the clubs or any messages you're putting out as well there, just sort of think of what the impact is on match-going fans in the stadium as well, because I think that part of the reason English football has been a success is because the stadiums are dynamic, exciting places to be, and that's because of the match-goers, And,
yes.
and if loads of policies are put in that make it really difficult to get to games because they're kicking off on a Sunday night or something, then I think about what that'll impact upon what you watch anyway, because the stadiums might look a bit rubbish and all this. But yeah, I think just generally, if you see messages on social media from the supporters groups, tune into them, give them a share, have a listen, read what they're saying. And certainly you can join your supporters trust at your club if you're a fan.
Yes, you can.
You're certainly not geographically restricted there. They would be more than happy to have supporters.
Right.
And actually, as part of the supporter engagement model that we've in favour of and we've helped design, there is a place you have what are called fan advisory boards, and there is a place for overseas representatives there to make the case as well, because obviously everyone does deserve representation, and those fans have got their own interests, and that has to be balanced against everyone else's. So we certainly think those supporters have a voice. So also, I suppose, at an even bigger level, looking at your club, if they're putting a fan advisory board together and they want overseas representatives on that fan advisory board, is that a role that you're capable of playing? Are you a legitimate voice in that sense? And is it something you fancy doing?
Yes.
There's a public profile comes with that. People will, if they disagree with you, I'm sure they'll let you know. But also, it's an opportunity to have your voice heard as well. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be an interesting development. A lot of clubs will have overseas representatives on their fan.
Yeah, and some are already in the process of forming. I know that in my case, there's an election coming up for an overseas representative on the trust through a group that is currently part of, or proposed part of, that fan advisory board as well. So there are things moving here, and even if you live abroad, your club and fans at your club are likely invested in moving along with the process of the regulator. Just briefly to clarify terms here before we wrap up, the golden share option that was discussed for quite a while. So a fan veto essentially on questions of legacy and heritage. That's kit, jersey colors, location, stadium, yada, yada, yada. Do you see that being fulfilled in the current form of the regulator? Is there enough safeguarding in there on these issues? Because that language has kind of gone away, but the topic is in there in the proposed regulator.
Yeah, I really liked the concept of the golden share, because I'm in comms, and from that sort of perspective, it's just really easy to explain, and it's a nice term that has been lost somewhat. my understanding of the legislation is those protections are still largely there. They are in place, particularly around the heritage issues, like you say, kit colours, badges, and so on. There's a little bit of discussion around how we word it in terms of the locality, so stadium protections, because, for instance, fans might not have a veto, but their view should be part of the consultation process. If a club says we need to move because of X, Y, and Z, at the minute, the regulator would consult fans as part of that process to see if it was a necessary move and so on, which is a good step. So we've been discussing that, but even that throws up interesting questions, because then you might get say Manchester United. We've talked about them a bit on this call, but it springs to mind. If Manchester United, if they decide they need to rebuild Old Trafford, which obviously they are talking about as a possibility, they might need to move stadiums for 3 years or however long, 2 years, however long it takes to build. So in that situation, does a regulator have to consult the supporters for a 2 or 3 year move? There's interesting questions like that. When it's just a temporary move, the club you might be tempted to think, well, no, just it's for 2 or 3 years, but then I don't know. What would Manchester United fans think if they moved into Manchester City Stadium for 2 or 3 years? What would Manchester City fans think? Throws up all sorts of questions then. But these are the types of interesting things we're working through. But I think in terms of the golden share, rewinding back, the protections do exist, but they're threaded through in different parts of the bill rather than one unified, this is a golden share and these are the specific things it protects. It's more threaded through in different clauses of the bill. So,
Good.
So I think it's still there, which is important. Heritage stuff's really important.
Last but not least, if we were to talk again in 5 years, what would it take for you to say the regulator's been successful, or maybe 10 years? Regulator's been successful. We're seeing changes in structure, in equity, in consideration of heritage questions that are good for the game and good for the fans.
Good question as well. I think that, one of the things, obviously, in 10 years, hopefully we don't have a European Super League, which is where we started from.
Amen.
And the legislation's coming for that. Hopefully we see a lot less, fewer insolvencies and administrations in the professional game in England, because that is a really important part of the regulator, having those proactive powers to intervene when the early signs are that things are going wrong for a club and financially they're getting in a bit of a tailspin, being able to intervene there. So hopefully 10 years down the line, we're not talking about more Berries or more Macclesfields or, all these clubs in the Northwest, particularly, like we said, more Rochdales and Oldhams, all these clubs who have had big problems. So that would be two. So the European Super League, fewer administration events. And I suppose the third one would be a more equitable distribution of the wealth through the game, narrowing that gap between the Premier League and the Championship, but also that money flowing down into League One and League Two clubs as well, so that we don't have a cliff edge out of the Premier League into the EFL and all the problems that causes. A much sort of more gradual plane would be really beneficial for the game, I think. So I think those are the three big things. And if these things all come true, that would obviously, I think, mean the regulator had been a big success.
Yeah. Very good. I think we've covered everything. I hope, however, and I'm sure the FSA will make sure of that fan impact doesn't stop there, that the institution of a regulator isn't some kind of all goals achieved type of moment.
No. I think
the fan advocacy continues, that especially pushing the clubs toward compliance continues, that the fan advisory boards and the role of the trusts increases, and that the current moment and these famous Super League protests were the beginning of something and not the conclusion of a story.
That's a fantastic summary. Couldn't have said it better myself. 100% agree. There's still a lot of work to be done, and it's certainly not going to be the case of a job done, everything's fixed. It's an ongoing process. There's always going to be, I'm sure in a few years' time, there's going to be some club somewhere gets into problems, and someone's going to be pointing a finger up saying, see, what was the point in the regulator? This club's still got problems.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's part of what we're about. We'll just have to try and fix that then. But I think that this will go a long way to preventing a lot of things from happening. So a lot of clubs should hopefully never even find themselves in that situation, but certainly no let up on that score. And hopefully the fan advisory board and increased supporter engagement encourages more people to get involved with their local supporters groups, really pushes that advocacy on, encourages the best people out there to get involved because, oh, look, I can have a voice, I can have an influence via my supporters group. So that's a win-win.
Wonderful. Thank you for the time, and also thank you for all your work. As far as I know, my only disagreement with the FSA is the lack of advocacy for pyrotechnics in stadiums. Yes. I come from a continental background, and that has certainly shaped me, not so much in England. You're doing wonderful work. Thank you for sticking with it throughout this process, with politicians, with club leaders, with league leaders, and for setting a step in the game that I think will have reverberations given the reach of English football around the globe.
I agree. Fantastic. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Be well. Thank you, as always, for listening to conversations that take us deeper into where our beautiful game is headed, beyond just the score lines and the goals and the stars. I know it's Champions League decision time, but for me this week is important because Sturm Graz has made it to another Austrian Cup final, again against Rapid Vienna. My dad's going to be at the game, so I'm sure I will be getting a lot of text messages while I watch that here in the US. As always, also the pointer to please subscribe to the show on whatever platform you are listening to and or rate it. I hear that subscribing is even more helpful for me than a rating, but also, most importantly, spread the word among friends who you know that value intelligent conversations about the game we love, its culture, and its future. Be well.